Hello, welcome back to 3D Creations. This week we're going to be mixing a little bit of history with our creations. I know that some of you might want to start like 3D printing miniatures for like Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. So we're going to see if we can make some medieval weaponry. Because we're going to start off with a sword. The main body of the blade is going to be a polygon. We can leave it at 6 sides. I'm going to squish it down this way to about, you want to make sure you do both sides so it's an even number. Right about 4 is good. You do want to make sure that it's a little thicker than you might want, especially for 3D printing. And then the top of the sword, I'm going to use a pyramid. I'm going to up the sides to 6. Now, unfortunately, this one is a little bit wonky, off on a weird angle. So I'm just going to do the best I can to match up. Yeah, there we go. You can tell when the outline box matches up with the side, and then we can drop that down. That's 8. We want to match it to 4. Yeah, there's 4. Rotate that 90 degrees. Bump that up. Let's make this a little wider, 22. And we want to match that. Once all of that is handled, we should have a pretty good match. Now I'm going to make this point taller, just as an aesthetic choice, and then let's take the whole point way up and extend the rest of the blade up to meet it. And that's looking, starting like a short sword. Cool. Now we can, well, we could probably make it a little longer, get us a proper long sword. Now the really defining factor of a sword comes from its hilt. So we have a couple of options that we can mess with. Probably the simplest is just grab a block, flatten it down, stretch it out, basic crossguard. Make it something, I don't know, give it like a brass look, or just slightly darker steel. Go like that. And that's not terrible. You can also, I'll make a bunch of different options. So I'm just going to copy the blade over, and you just need to make one of these. Just pick your favorite, or make up your own. There's no hard set rules on what your sword needs to look like. So if we do something like this, we grab a cylinder, make sure it's reasonably proportioned. And with that, also try to remember that 3D printing you kind of want bulky. I'm going to copy and paste, make that a hole. And give us this sort of crescent look. I would say those are the two main ones. You can also take this, flip it around 180 if you would prefer a more swept hilt look. Or just come up with whatever you think looks good. There we go. Then we can just grab a cylinder, make it a And now I'm going to select all of this. Well, actually, let's add the pommel first. Pommel's just a simple cylinder turned on its side. flatten down. A disc pommel like this is very common. Now, as you can see, I was not too worried about lining everything up because we have that align tool. That will be your best friend. There we go. That is a sword. I'm actually going to add a bevel. And I can keep the segments at 1. There we go. Once they're groups, make sure you bring back the color. There we go. 2 different sword types. Make up whatever you want. Alright, I'm going to scale these down now that they're groups. I'm going to scale them down and just move them aside because not everybody uses swords. So let's talk about some other options. Well, if you're playing some D&D, you might want a bow and arrow. That's fairly simple. A bow is, we're just going to take a cylinder. If you're thinking of the English longbow type thing, that's just a stretched out cylinder, which we can copy and paste. And then chop a hole into. And honestly, that's basically all you need. Quick note about that. You do want to make it fairly thick if you're 3D printing, and most of the time, don't bother adding a string if you're 3D printing it. That's just too small of a detail that it won't show up, and it will just mess up the printing. So you don't need the string. It's fairly straightforward, even without it. What's nice about this is we can sort of scale it up this way, and it looks like it's being drawn back instead of just sitting there. Arrows, fairly simple. Just stretch out a cylinder to get the arrow shaft. And we could, I'm going to use a pyramid. You could use a roof type instead. But I like the pyramid is just a little bit more accurate. And then I'm just going to select these 2 and align them. It's just the easiest way. There we go. Now then, to add some fletchings, take a wedge. We're going to scale it down, these 2, but then we want to scale it up overall. The fletching part is honestly something that you might want to skip if you're 3D printing this, just because it's possible this might be too small. You might require some trial and error to see what works. Then we can select all of this, make it a group, bring back the color, maybe make the arrow shaft something a little more reasonable. Scale it down, maybe lengthen it. That's like a javelin. Don't necessarily need that. There you go. You have one bow and an arrow. And I know these proportions are a little exaggerated, like the arrowhead is pretty dang huge, but that's important when 3D printing because, especially for miniatures, if it's going to be this big, you want those exaggerated features to really stand out. Otherwise, it's like, well, you've got a stick. For a Viking type shield, that's simple enough. Scale up a cylinder, flatten it down, and honestly, that's pretty much it. It might be a good idea to add a half sphere right in the middle, um, because they actually had a metal cap that would go on the very center of shields, because they would actually cut a hole in the back of a shield for your hand to stick through, and hold on to a handle in the middle. And again, with 3D printing, if you intersect something, that's just going to fuse the material together. So make sure you always want to err on stuff poking into an object instead of hovering. If you were to print this, there are two different methods you can do to attach a shield. You can either put it directly on an arm. So if I just grab a cylinder to represent an arm, if you wanted a like arm mounted shield, you could do this, but you want to make sure that it's sticking into the shield itself, maybe by quite a bit, because that's where it's going to be supported from. The other option is to give it a handle, which can be done either by just doing something like this, making sure they're all aligned, and just adding something to it so that you can intersect with other objects. Or you could even shove it out a little bit and then maybe add a box in to bridge the gap, just to separate it out a little. It doesn't have to be a box, but yeah, I would recommend this. Could be a little less stable because depending on which way you're printing, this gap could mess things up. So I would recommend with the first two options. I'm going to go with this one, just so you can poke a hand there. We can even bevel this and make it look a little bit better. For a more traditional knight shield, like a kite shield or something, that can be made. Why don't we start with a cube? I'm going to squish it down, make it bigger, just so we can work with it. And this can be accomplished by adding two roof pieces. There we go. And that's already getting to look like a normal kite shield, or a normal like shield that you normally see knights using. I'm going to throw another copy of the roof piece up at the top and really drop that way down, just to mix up the shape a little bit. And then once we make it a new color, maybe a blue, or make it a darker blue, and group it, that gives us a much more defined shield shape. And then the same process can be applied to adding a handle. You could even use this scribble tool, maybe add a design of some sort. Maybe we could draw some sort of like dragon out here. Add some wings. Because having designs on shields is actually fairly common. And feel free to mix it up. Be creative. Now, I know in many games, not everybody uses weapons like this. There are also spells that can be cast and all sorts of things like that. So why don't we make a book? That can be done with a couple boxes. And a cylinder in the middle will give us a sort of book frame that we can work with. Because this is a good scene. So, then I'm going to take this round roof, match it up to the middle, push it almost out to the edge, and this is going to act like our pages. Once we flatten it down, you see how it sort of gives that rounded, like book shape as the pages like fold up and meet back in the middle. Cut and paste. There we go. We can align it by eye. That's fine. Now, what we can do is we can select one side and tilt it just a little. Do the same thing with the other side. And then once we adjust for the colors, this will give us a wonderful book color. I'm going to make it a purple cover. And then a light parchment-esque inside. And then this could be held by one of your characters and give you the nice spellcaster aesthetic. And don't forget to group everything so that you don't lose your pages somewhere. And same thing with the shield. Feel free to embellish and add stuff on the cover of books. And with all of this, you can figure out other weapons, like there are spears and glaives that you could, maces, that you could easily make for your miniatures that you want to print. Alright, so you should be all set to equip your adventuring miniatures for printing. And that should make your characters a little more unique, depending if you're a spellcaster, a ranger, fighters, rogues, whatever. Feel free to use your imagination. There is no wrong answer when you're creating something for yourself. So, hope you had fun, and we'll see you next week.